want to say this, that the previous presenter, the Honorable Member Pauline Sukai, did a terrible job at representing our indigenous peoples. She utilized majority of her time comparing what the AP and UFC has done, and PNC and the PPP and all sorts of things. We wanted to hear in this house what benefits are to come in 2025 for the indigenous peoples. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member failed to say how we're going to preserve our indigenous heritage, our first people. The honorable member failed to say how we are going to ensure that the language survives maybe the next generation. The honorable member failed to say to our people, our indigenous people, what future they have or guaranteed future they have under this administration. And I can assure you, they don't have a good future. The only future that they will get that is to the benefit of generations to come is under the coalition. Mr. Speaker, first of all, throughout today, all we've been hearing is about the legacy of the PPP. We heard about the PNC way back down in 1964. I say to the Guyanese people here this evening, as I stand on this floor, that the young people of this country are not necessarily concerned about history. We are concerned about our future. And the future don't look bright under the People's Progressive Party. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is an honor to deliver my contribution to this debate, the Guyana's National Budget 2025. This moment is particularly significant as it marks my final contribution on this side of the House, because we will be going into government come the next elections. As we look ahead, we are steadfast in our resolve to reclaim our country and prepare to assume our rightful place in government. Mr. Speaker, before I begin, allow me to commend the staff of the Ministry of Finance and various ministries who contributed to the compilation of this budget. Sadly, despite their efforts under the guidance of the PPP, like every other budget, fails to deliver a quality life for all Guyanese. It falls short of fostering pride among our citizens and thoroughly addressing the needs. Instead, this budget is riddled with skepticism and criticisms. These shortcomings are consistent with the PPP's lack of effective consultation and inclusion. It reflects a heavy-handed approach in governance, which continues to plague local authorities, particularly our neighborhood democratic councils, municipalities, and regional democratic councils. Democracy is becoming a growing farce in this country. Now is the time to rise against tyranny, nepotism, and favoritism. We as Guyanese cannot afford to allow our history to rewrite itself. A history marked with failed projects, gross marginalization, and venality. As one of the youngest MPs in this House, I refuse to stand on the sideline and do nothing about it. And I'm sure our Guyanese brothers and sisters won't. Mr. Speaker, as a son of the soil, unlike Honorable Mark Phillips or Prime Minister Hugh Todd, Joseph Hamilton, and Kwame McCoy, I'm a proud Londoner. Mr. Speaker, I hail from the heart of Guyana, Region 10. Linden by now should have been that of a city status. Mind you, all 5 names that I've called are sitting ministers and hail from Linden. Linden should have been in a better position than it is currently, Mr. Speaker. And yet, I must say this here, if they care about Linden so much, they've been in government for over 27 years, and we have not seen a major successful transformative project in Region 10. And yet, they parade themselves weekend after weekend. The Honorable Prime Minister comes into Linden making a set of noise with your siren and flashing lights, but you are not delivering what the people are asking for. Mr. Speaker, contrary to what the PPP reports, Upper Damara Barbee's youth unemployment is very high. The greatest resource, as we are fully aware, is that of human. We need to invest more in our young people. But yet still, the government is embracing, but Honorable Kwame McCoy, you're hurting my ears. Your, your lace front, fix your lace front. Mr. Speaker, this current administration embrace a hustle rather than employment. They embrace a 10-day job rather than a full-time job. And the Guyanese youths are tired of this, Mr. Speaker. In 2024, Guyana's unemployment rate stood at an average of 14.62%. This figure is likely inaccurate because we have an influx of migrants in our country. I dare the Honorable Minister Joseph Hamilton to tell us what is his real plan for our young people in Guyana. Let's hear from the Honorable Charles Ramson Jr. Tell us what more you're doing for the young people in Guyana. The young people need proper representation, and that representation comes from this side of the house. We would have heard from Madam Nima Flubes earlier. Fantastic plans. And we will ensure that those plans come into place when we get into government come later on this year. Mr. Speaker, the labor force is in dire need of revamping. The demand for skilled workers is on the rise owed to the construction boom. Case in point, Mr. Speaker, when we look at the Wismar-Mackenzie Bridge, how many Guyanese or lineners are employed at that landmark project that the PPP continues to claim, even though under the APN UAFC, the feasibility study was done and we were well on our way to get that project completed. How many Chinese are working there? How many Latins are working there? And we see the same thing happening along the Linden to Lethem Road, which is currently in its first phase. Mr. Speaker, greater representation is needed and the PPP is not doing it. Mr. Speaker, the opposition continues to welcome development because we love our people. We welcome infrastructure improvements. We welcome bridges, roads, but not to the expense of Guyanese people. Guyanese must be put first, not be placed on a cheap labor line or hide behind the pretext of Guyanese are unskilled. That means more training and retooling needs to be done, Mr. Speaker. I was hoping to hear from the Honorable Manny Chan about how she intends to retool the Guyana Technical Institutes, Linden Technical Institute, and the other technical institutes across the country. We did not hear about how much money is going to be pumped into those institutes because it's evident that this government don't believe in pre-vocational education. They don't believe in technical education, which is driving the development of this country. Mr. Speaker, I want to say this here. Of course, is a reflective of yourself. Mr. Speaker, when you look at the Guyana Technical Education Examination, which many hundreds of students from across this country is writing every year, you know what? It is not even accredited. That says a lot. Greater emphasis needs to be placed on accreditation. You don't want to be going to school for 2 years just to collect a piece of paper. You want to be employed. Mr. Speaker, I go further to share with our Guyanese brothers, and I hope they're listening. Remittance have historically played a significant role in Guyana's economy. MoneyGram and Western Union, of course. In 2020, remittance inflow accounted for approximately 8% of the country's gross domestic product, the GDP. In 2022, I'm happy that you're paying attention, Guyana received over $510 million in personal transfers. Mr. Speaker, it's alarming to know that this fastest growing economy with a $1.3 trillion budget, right now, remittance stands at 17% or contributes to 17% of this country's GDP. Now, Mr. Speaker, like my good friend, Director of Finance would say, trickle-down economics does not exist in this country. Now, while the government is splurging a lot of money all over the place, the small man is not feeling it. That is why they're lined up day after day trying to collect their little remittance from these services. Mr. Speaker, $50 US cannot, you cannot go to the market with that, you cannot pay rent with that, you cannot send your children with just that. Mr. Speaker, there's more that needs to be done, and this budget does not reflect the needs of the people. But there's hope. There's changing tide. A changing tide is coming, Mr. Speaker. They will come to this honorable house and say we're cushioning the economy by distributing cash grants. Might I say, sir, it was the same PPP regime that disagreed with the opposition position of direct cash transfer. Mr. Speaker, the citizens have raked up so much debt from courts and bank loans. Some of them will even die before they receive this cash grant. And guess what? When the cash grant was announced, many of them went into debt because they were expecting to get a little something before Christmas. You know what? They still owe courts, they still owe rent, still owe singers and other bills. Mr. Speaker, just the other day, the learned Attorney General said that should the recipient pass away before collecting the cash grants, the beneficiaries will be able to collect. I must say that the Attorney General is a CFAR man, because he is anticipating that this cash grant ain't coming anytime soon. As the PPP continues to shift goals, Guyanese are weary of the fluffs and buffs. Mr. Speaker, let's turn our attention to public works. Just last year, billions of dollars in contracts were signed between small contractors across Guyana. Upper Demerara, Berbice, of course, many PPP loyalists got contracts, and even some first-time contractors got contracts as well. We welcome this. Mr. Speaker, I must report to this honorable house that the residents of Region 10 are disgusted with the lethargic approach that is being made when it comes to the completion of these projects. We were expecting before Christmas, and then we heard by New Year. Mr. Speaker, the roads are in a mess. And might I ask the Honorable Ejil, who is going to construct the driveway entrance from those roads? And where are the drains? Mr. Speaker, let me tell you something. Let me tell the House something as a matter of fact. Contract awards undoubtedly is being used as a political tool, just as how cybercrime is being used to silence naysayers who criticize the government and its affairs. First-time contractors are happy and disappointed at the same time for two things. They continue to ask questions like, why was I not considered over the last 4 years for a contract? Why now, heading into elections, you're giving us contracts?
Honorable member, I need to stop you there for the Honorable Minister Teixeira to move that we go beyond 8 o'clock to complete our business for today.
Thank you for the reminder, Mr. Speaker. I wish to ask the House to support our continuing our debate and past the hour of 8 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The question is put. Those in favor, say aye. Those against, no. Ayes have it.
Thank you.
Honorable MP, you may continue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Guyanese, let me share in a Gen Z term, let me share some tea. The capital projects stands at 90% of the budgetary allocation, or 90% of the budgetary allocation for capital projects is awarded to 10% of the PPP's family, friends, and favorites. And 10.
Do you have a study to show that? Be careful, you know.
Yes.
Right?
I'll lay it over.
So you'll have to lay it over.
Yes, no problem with that, sir. 10% of the budgetary
But
allocation.
before I allow you to continue, want me at least quote the source of that survey.
I would say it's AI, but no, I'm just joking with that. I'm just joking with that. No, sir. This here is based on what we had calculated over the last couple of years in terms of budgetary allocation. So it's right in the budgetary
I have
allocation.
stopped the clock. And as a MP who is looking to come back and go on the opposite side, I want to let you know that there was a particular person who quoted some figures and was sent to the privilege committee. Bishop Ejel? Okay. So, if you can't, you know, I would suggest you move on.
Mr. Speaker, based on our calculation, majority of the contracts are being awarded in the sum of an average of a large amount to PPP's families, friends, and favorites, while a smaller or a larger amount, a smaller amount is awarded to a larger group of people, which basically says to us here in this honorable house that the PPP continues to look after themselves rather than these first-time contractors that they so care about. Mr. Speaker, everything that the PPP touches falls apart. When we look at Region 10, the call center, Meadows BPO, which they announced 1,000 jobs for Londoners and young people. And what happened? It never surpassed 150. And right now, it has been transferred to ProChat, which basically is just about 35 persons. What happened to the thousands of jobs that were promised? Mr. Speaker, the Bamia Primary School still continues to be a burning issue. And imagine after 5 years, this school is still not handed over to the Regional Democratic Council. Mr. Speaker, the Wairuni Secondary School, and I believe the Honorable Minister, Ani Chan, catfished the residents there in Wairuni because the building that is being constructed looks no way close to the architect's sketch. Mr. Speaker, we've been hearing all day thank you very much. We've been hearing all day from the Honorable Charles Ramson. Mr. Ramson, what is going on with the Kokwani swimming pool and the money that was allocated towards it? In terms of Kokwani, let's talk a little bit about that. The Honorable Mark Phillips, back in 2020, you commissioned a 900 kilowatt generator for KUI. And guess what? Today, we're having constant blackouts. This is not Georgetown, this is Kokwani. Electricity is free. Mr. Speaker, when we look at the waterfront road, Honorable Minister Ejil, why is it that the waterfront road is not completed? Even though the mobilization money was granted to the contractor, no work has begun. Mr. Speaker, I then turn my attention to the Honorable Onijwal Run. What is the status of our industrial estate that you've boasted about? And we are willing to accept. What is the update on that? Mr. Speaker, in terms of food security, the Honorable Mustafa boasts about the government and what it's doing in terms of agro-processing. We have an agro-processing plant in Linden, and guess what? 2 blenders and a cake mixer. That's not good enough, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when it talks about the promises of portable water, the Honorable Susan Rodriguez, my good friend, would me say we're delivering 100% portable water to the entire Linden. We're there. Mr. Speaker, $150 million was allocated, and this is reference to 2023 budget. $150 million was allocated to the Takama WAF to aid in, of course, the agriculture sector. Mr. Speaker, I visited that site just a couple of days ago. That does not look like $150 million. It looks like $15 million. I'm asking the government to be accountable for the taxpayers' money. Mr. Speaker, in terms of house lots, the government came here and said we've given out 30,000 house lots, or how much thousand house lots, Mr. Speaker? Guess what? A lot of those allottees or those persons who are given a lot are still looking for their lots. Mr. Speaker, I asked the Honorable Minister Kroll to look into this. Mr. Speaker, no allocation for the completion of the Millie's hideout to Sand Hills Road. Mr. Speaker, this government is not serious about food security, since a lot of the lands in Millie's hideout focuses extremely on agriculture. Mr. Speaker, let me go further. There's no incentive to attract meaningful investment in Linden right now, and sub-region 2. Mr. Speaker, I turn my attention to the Honorable Vikram Bharat.
Before you turn your attention to him, I turn the time attention to the Chief Whip.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the honourable member be given 5 minutes to conclude his presentation.
Thank you, Chief Whip. Honourable
Mr.
member,
Speaker,
you may continue.
of course, it was reported in this House that through the efforts of bauxite mineral and also forest bauxite, we're producing millions of tons, or exporting millions of tons of bauxite. Mr. Speaker, we continue to be bashed on this side of the House with the failings of Russell. But I want to make it clear to the Guyanese people and those that live in the area of Araima, Hururu, and Kokwani. Our government stood with the people, with the workers at Russell, because they raised an issue of being underpaid. Mr. Speaker, if this government is so good, why is it taking so long, Honorable Member Vikram Bharat, to find a new investor in Araima? Mr. Speaker, There's much more to be desired when it comes to this budget. Let's turn our attention really quick to tourism, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister spoke about the, the country's contribution in terms of tourism amounting to over $13 billion, primarily owed to the hospitality sector. Despite that fact, the PPP continues to miss the mark in effectively training and preparing workers in this sector to effectively deliver. Mr. Speaker, we need to continue to focus heavily on training. And might I add, Mr. Speaker, we're still awaiting that hospitality school. But I believe a different approach might have to be taken. And I'm hoping that the Honorable Minister can consider, or in fact, we will implement when we get into government, that we have to decentralize training so that it reaches the people that needs it the most. And the people are saying that the hotel industry in Georgetown, along the East Bank and possibly the East Coast, need to benefit from that first. Mr. Speaker, the APNU AFC, when we get into government, we'll be focusing on developing a niche tourism offering which focuses on ecotourism, cultural heritage, etc. We must strengthen our infrastructure, not only accommodation and digital creativity, but also focus on our transportation network. Guyana must be marketed better to the world. We must not be known as a transshipment point and whatever. We must push our tourism product to the max. It must go all across the world, Mr. Speaker, and more investment needs to be made. Mr. Speaker, we need to strengthen our policy and regulation. More tax incentives must be given to attract investors in the tourism and hospitality sector. We must also diversify revenue streams with focuses on domestic tourism. We need to have more engagements at various tour and trade expos across the world as well. Mr. Speaker, greater support from this government is needed, but sadly, we are not getting that, but we will definitely correct it. Mr. Speaker, let me just, as I prepare to close, I must share this here very quickly, that when it comes to good governance, Mr. Speaker, it's disheartening to know that our Honorable Minister Parag fiddles in the business of local authorities. The subject minister must respect democracy, and it's a bottom-up approach. Why are we fiddling in the affairs of the Linden Mayor and Town Council? Mr. Speaker, it is unacceptable. Mr. Speaker, the PPP embraces bad governance. That is why at the Regional Democratic Council, there's still 2 vacancies for assistant regional executive officers, and the lone deputy regional officer was sent away, and now remaining just the REO. We ask that these vacancies be filled so as to allow for better and greater accountability. Mr. Speaker, the regional tender board is expired. We need a new regional tender board now. There's no board at the Linden House Hospital Complex. In fact, the REO serves as the regional health officer and the CEO of the hospital. That could be right. Make it make sense, Mr. Speaker. The Linden Enterprise Network, $300 million locked away in a coffer. The people need the money so that they can expand their businesses. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, it is time Guyanese open up their eyes. It is time to wake up. Sleep in prayer, Honorable Manichan. It is time for Guyanese to unite and take back our country. Take charge of our destiny. Take charge of our future. The PPP's governance is marked with poor planning and exclusionary practices. While the country has seen significant economic opportunities through our oil sector and oil resources, Guyanese argue that these benefits have not been equitably distributed. Addressing these governance challenges will require greater transparency, stronger institutions, and a commitment to inclusive and sustainable development. Mr. Speaker, at this time, I cannot support Budget 2025 in its current form.
Thank you, Honorable Member, Mr. Sears. And now for